The snow fell sideways on Hellion 4. Not white, not snow, really, but a fine ash mixed with silica and atmospheric grit, hissing across the landing struts of the shuttle as I stepped out beneath the fractured sky. It scoured my robes, catching in the microfilament seams meant to dampen emotional bleed, and began working its way into the furrows of my gloves. The kind of dust that sticks, the kind you don't brush off so much as carry with you. I adjusted the neural tether slung over my spine and tapped the emitter node at my temple. The link blinked once, green, stable. "Anchor fields active," came the voice behind me. Atun Bir Calvadra stood beneath the belly of the shuttle, hands folded behind his back. The nullfield beacon on his chest emitted its low, thrumming beat, barely perceptible unless you'd spent enough years inside someone else's mind to notice the silence that follows. I had. 17-meter radius, he added, approaching. No psi puncture yet, residue density increasing. I didn't ask how he knew. He always spoke like that, reporting things as if they'd already happened, as if we were actors playing out roles in a script long since memorized. Atun was a null zone operative, grown in a sterile genomic crucible by a pale accord splinter cell called the Echoier consortium. His presence suppressed anomalous psychic emissions, memory bleed, and metaphysical contamination. He was also the only reason I was still sane. Mostly. I trudged ahead, boots crunching against broken ceramic shale and petrified moss veins. The shrine complex rose beyond the ridge, its southern flank broken in a rusted fan of twisted beams and scorched glyph stone. The perimeter sensors I'd seeded 3 hours ago still blinked on my shard display. It was cold, but not in the usual way. The kind of cold that eats into the skull, not the skin, like your thoughts start chipping away at themselves just to stay warm. "Engram's spike occurred here," I said, pointing toward a vine-strangled obelisk half buried in slush. 3 days ago, local scavenger cracked the seal on a mnemonic cyst. Atun's optical nodes flickered once, a brief acknowledgement. He said nothing. "Died inside 3 minutes," I continued. "Lung hemorrhage, cranial pressure burst." Still nothing. I glanced back. This would be the part where a normal human says something like "sounds promising." Atun blinked once, slowly. "The cyst has already remembered you, Vel." That stopped me. I looked away, mouth dry. He was likely right. Memory residue had a way of reaching out. Once you touched enough of it, it started touching back. I'd spent 20 years working for the Ordos of Remembrance, back when the Pale Accord still believed that salvaging the minds of the dead could prevent the collapse of the living. Back before the schism, before the Synod Purge, back before they decided memory was heresy. I was a licensed Mnemo extractant, once. Now I took contracts from forgotten worlds like this one. Places where the dead whispered through ruins and the living wanted answers too expensive for legality. I adjusted the retinal shard embedded in my left eye. A flick of my brow activated the engram overlay. Color halos bloomed around the obelisk. Memory density low, but climbing. "You feel that?" I asked. "No," Atun replied. He never did. We moved into the shrine proper, what was left of it. The architecture here bore the hallmarks of high ritual synth splicing, stone threaded with old signal wire and sensory mesh, a culture that had tried to pray with its hands and think with its walls, and then, at some point, they'd stopped, or died. At the center of the hall, sunken into a dais of cracked obsidian, the mnemonic cyst pulsed, like a heart trapped in stone. Translucent, filled with crystallized memory condensate. I circled it carefully, boots crunching glass shale. My gloves twitched, pressure sensors responding to ambient thought static. The relic was reacting. "Field's holding," Atun said quietly. "But it knows we're here." I knelt, drew a shallow breath, reached back and connected my neural tether to the nerve reliquary. The unit clicked to life, purring with old code and shivering circuits. My body stiffened, blood pressure dropped. 1,000 fragmentary voices sang at the edge of hearing. I lowered my head. Gloved fingers touched the cyst. I remember the lost. I walk through their end. Not to become them, but to carry the thread. The words weren't mine. Old stabilizer chant, meant to anchor my sense of self before ingestion. It didn't always work. The relic cracked. The memory dust inside wasn't literal, it was an engram composite, a semi-psychoactive vapor suspended in vitrified structure. But when it broke, it felt like dust. Sharp, sweet. I inhaled, and the world slipped sideways. I landed inside someone else's breath. A long corridor, arching high, filled with radiant symbols hovering mid-air. Not text, more like ideas rendered through light and ache. A body knelt before an altar, not human. Exoskeletal, 3 arms. Trichordal vocal tract emitting a sound I'd never heard, yet somehow knew. It wasn't just memory, it was presence. Behind the altar, a gate of crystalline threads shimmered. A voice spoke in cadence. Divinitas 9, execute protocol tier, resurrection, pattern B, confirm reception. The gate flashed, stars rotated behind it, and a phrase burned across my mind like a brand etched in scripture. The godwake begins in pieces. You are the first echo. I screamed, and the memory buckled. I came back choking, coughing grit into my rebreather. My head throbbed, vision doubled. Atun stood exactly where I'd left him, watching. His null field was wavering, barely. Enough to let the protocol bleed through. You saw it, he said flatly. I nodded, wiping bile from my mouth. I didn't see it. I lived it. Specify. A gate, star coordinates, a command phrase, Godwake protocol. It was spoken like scripture, like it was meant to be recited. My voice trembled. Atun, it matched the pattern fragments Rayar flagged on Threnos, the same architecture, the same cadence. He didn't move. I don't speak that language, I added, but I understood it, like it had been translated just for me. Because it had. I turned slowly. Signal spike, he said, gesturing to his field beacon. Subspace Tier 0 burst, 11-point resonance. Began precisely when your chant ended. That's not possible. He didn't answer, just stared at the cyst, which now sat lifeless and dim. It had transmitted. Through me. Using me as an antenna. I sat back against a broken plinth, hands shaking. The dust clung to my gloves. Inside me, fragments shifted. Thoughts that weren't mine tried to surface. Visions of buildings I'd never walked, languages I'd never learned. This is happening again, I whispered. Yes, Atun said, but not the same way. He stepped closer. I could feel the field stabilizing again, the buzzing quiet in my head returning. Then we're running out of time, I said. Atun didn't blink. You were chosen, Vel. No, I'm infected. Functionally indistinguishable. I looked at him, and for a heartbeat, I hated him for being right. Above us, the air trembled. Far away, something began responding on the same frequency. A second node, a second mind. The protocol was listening, and now it knew my name. The cyst's dust still clung to the inside of my lungs as we climbed. Helion 4's orbit hung low and indifferent through the observation slit, its fractured atmosphere bleeding green and violet into the void. The shuttle's stabilizers groaned against decaying atmospheric turbulence. This far out, terraforming had long since failed, and the planet's magnetic field collapsed with it. What passed for a sky had turned to something closer to liquid static, a shimmering interference. I sat on the lower bench of the shuttle's aft cabin, gloves off, fingertips raw and twitching. I'd scrubbed them twice with the stabilizing solvent, but the phantom pressure remained. The memory didn't just fade once inhaled, it lingered, layered. A slow echo under the skin. My tether rig was still coiled across my spine, dormant now. I hadn't yet dared a manual resync with the nerve reliquary. Not after what I'd seen. Atun stood by the forward bulkhead, arms folded, null field still active at low intensity. His presence made it hard to think. Too much quiet in the head. Not silence exactly. More like someone had drained the room of any reflective surface. I couldn't even hear myself remembering. "You're pacing," I said. "I am standing still," he replied, without turning. I closed my eyes. The voice from the cyst still hadn't faded. "You are the first echo." I didn't know what that meant. Not really, but every instinct I had, the ones that were still mine, told me the protocol hadn't just used me, it had recognized me. The shuttle banked. A flicker of turbulence passed through my stomach like a cold hand. From the viewport, the curve of the pale relic assembly came into view. Massive rings of hollowed asteroids wired together with dead scaffolds and orbit thrusters. A shipyard-turned mausoleum, once part of the Pale Accord's outer memory archives, now just another abandoned node in a failing regime. We were docking with the Sanctions ghost. I stiffened. Rayar Cotain was waiting. The man had been a shadow trailing my name for most of my adult life. Archiving, watching. A former inquisitor of the Pale Accord's Memory Control Bureau. A man who once rewrote people out of history like pruning rot from a vine. He was also the one who taught me the stabilizer chance when I was 14 cycles old. "Do not provoke him," Atun said suddenly. "I haven't seen the man in 13 years. He has not changed." "Neither have I." Atun turned his head slightly. "Yes, you have." The door hissed open, and the boarding arm extended with a creaking exhale of airlock pressure. The Sanctions ghost was a hollow thing. Once a judicial cruiser for cultural enforcement patrols, now stripped of most insignia, her hull blotched with radiation sears and unregistered sensor shunts. Nothing was standard anymore. Everyone was living off scavenged trust and reconditioned dogma. The corridor lights flickered, not stuttered, flickered. The difference mattered. These weren't malfunctions. They were intentional power dips, coded patterns used in former Accord protocol to signal corridor type, threat level, and override priority. Rayar was signaling. "This is his ship," I reminded myself. My boots clicked against the deck. It smelled of copper resin and time. Time doesn't smell, of course, but memory residue does. Every corridor we passed held a trace of someone else's footsteps. We reached the central chamber. Dim, oval-shaped. Archive banks ringed the walls, most sealed, a few leaking light from data cores still looped in idle recall. He kept them running. Probably didn't even sleep anymore. He stood at the far end, lean, tired. The same coat, stripped of its seals and barcodes, but unmistakably Accord make. Left hand gloved in black synth skin. I knew what was underneath. He turned. His face had changed. Older, yes, but sharper. Not in the physical sense, in the way he looked at me, like I was both a question and an answer he hadn't yet forgiven. "Wraith," he said. "Cotain." He stepped forward, and something about the way he moved made me straighten. Not a threat, a ritual. He stopped a meter away. "You inhaled it." I nodded. It responded. "So did the sector's relay array. Every dormant listening node from here to Varelian Belt tripped at the same moment you activated the cyst." Atun spoke then, which implies it was never dormant. Rayar didn't blink. It was waiting. He walked to the center console and keyed a sequence on the dial pad. One of the archive cores opened, spilling out a low-fidelity projection. Visuals fragmentary at first, of a world I'd never seen. And yet, my throat tightened. That was the city from the memory. Radiant arches, gravity-defiant towers blooming like mineral flowers beneath alien constellations. "You're not the first to see it," Rayar said. "But you're the first who knew the words before they were spoken." I looked at him. "What words?" He turned and I saw his expression crack, just slightly. He pressed a sequence on his prosthetic. The voice that played was mine. "Divinitus 9, execute protocol tier resurrection pattern B, confirm reception." But the timestamp was from 13 hours before I inhaled the memory. I sat down, hard. Impossible, I said. No longer, Rayar replied. He didn't look smug. He looked exhausted. The cyst didn't give you memory, Wraith, he said quietly. It gave you synchronization. It finished a ritual already started, elsewhere, elsewhen. Cotain stood still as ever. This is convergence. Rayar nodded, and it's accelerating. There's a sound when your worldview shifts. A sensory hollowing, like something inside you has been scooped out and replaced with empty coordinates. I'd felt it before. Once, when a dying archivist passed me the death chant of a civilization lost to syntactic entropy, where the language had decayed to the point no sentence could be completed. That was grief. This was design. Rayar activated another hollow. This one showed Karu Vash. He was suspended in the corner chamber, surrounded by logical arc diagrams and theological nodes displayed like equations. His spine-mounted coil pulsed with analytic glow, mapping myth sequences through probabilistic alignment. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was listening to it. Karuvash was a Mergan, a tri-limbed arthrosapient species bred for probabilistic cognition rather than linear thought. An exotheologian by trade, Karu dismantled religious architectures the way others disassembled old machines, by isolating stress points until the whole belief collapsed under its own contradictions. He was a heretic in every language he spoke, and he wore the title like armor. That's your observer? I asked. Rayar nodded. He prefers the term exotheologian. Claims belief is a neurological parasitism. Charming. He's the one who found the cross-signal match in the crater scripture on Tauros, and he agrees with your hallucination. I flinched. It wasn't a hallucination. Rayar held up a hand. I agree. He turned off the display. Vel, he said. There are 13 known fragments of the protocol, all encoded in structures we thought were symbolic. Temples, yes, but also memory cores, engine architecture, prayer geometry carved into satellite orbital tracks. And they match? They harmonize, he said. Not in data, in faith structure. Cultures with no contact share the same redemption myth, the same return cadence, the same sacrifice ratios. Ratios? Belief, he said, seems to generate results, quantifiable ones. Where the protocol's fragments are active, environment shifts. Gene markers mutate. Gravity anomalies surface. Matter reorganizes along symbolic preferences. You're saying prayer changes physics? Rayar exhaled slowly. I'm saying the protocol may have been designed to reward ritual. And the more minds participate, the stronger the result. And what's the result? He paused. That's what we don't know. Cotain spoke up. You've activated 3 fragments already. I turned sharply. No, you have, not consciously, but they responded to you. Your mnemonic profile matches the precursor encoding. You're a vessel. I didn't choose this. No, Cotain said, but it may have chosen you. I stood. The room felt smaller than before. Rayar crossed to a sealed cabinet and withdrew a handheld reliquary. Obsidian housing, lined with whisper thread. Ancient. He held it out. This is the next one, he said. Recovered from the choir station orbiting Eidos 10. Its interior sensor logs activated when you inhaled the cyst on Helion 4. I'm not a prophet. No, Rayar said. You're a recorder. That's all the protocol needs. My hand hovered over the reliquary. I could feel the hum beneath its shell, already sinking to my tether. Karu Vash's voice crackled over the comm line. I suggest we go before this one loses another thread of himself. I looked up. His voice was smooth, amused. The Mergan's optic crown shimmered under ambient light. He stood in the corridor, one limb resting against the hatchway. He smiled, if his species' mandible shift could be called that. I've waited a long time to meet a living myth, he said. Let's find out if you can survive belief. Behind him, the ship began to align for its next jump. The signal was spreading, and the world was beginning to listen. The first time I saw Divinitus 9, it didn't look like a construct. It looked like a wound. A vast mechanical lesion wrapped in prayer architecture, drifting dead center through the ion wreckage fields of Calderis 5. It didn't rotate, but you could feel the gravity of its silence, like a presence holding its breath just long enough to be noticed. We came in from the sunward vector, coasting behind deflective chaff. The Sanction's ghost creaked through its approach sequence, systems throttled down to passive. Our signal hull quieted to a low archival heartbeat. 1 memory per cycle, just enough to convince any lingering watchers that we were a derelict drifting through final rites. I stood in the forward viewport chamber, tether coils wrapped across my shoulders, gloves secured tight. The new reliquary, the choir station fragment, rested in a stasis cradle beside me. It had stopped reacting to everything except me. I hadn't dared open it. Not after the last one. Rayar was down in the core archives, filtering intercepted prayer data from the moonside cult satellites. Karu was pacing the upper bridge in loose spirals, muttering Mergan theological constructs to himself. He spoke them like equations. Not in faith, but curiosity, like one might whisper to see if the numbers rearranged when voiced aloud. Atun stood beside me, arms at rest, eyes fixed on Divinitus 9 through the viewport. "It is not asleep," he said. I nodded. I didn't ask how he knew. I could feel it too. The construct was bigger than I'd expected. Not vast in the planetary sense, nothing like a Dyson bloom, but there was density to it, a kind of sacred compression. You looked at it and felt like it had always been there, like the stars had formed around it, not the other way. The hull aligned. Karu's voice crackled through the speaker node overhead. "Boarding vector is established. I assume none of you are expecting a reception." The docking umbilical extended with a long exhale of magnetic lock. No active response from Divinitus 9, but the automated docking clamps engaged anyway, like the construct had simply accepted it. I pulled the neural hood up over my skull, slotted the uplink into my nape port, and closed my eyes for the sync surge. The tether purred. I didn't say a prayer, but part of me remembered one. I left it unspoken. The boarding tube was lined with frost, not true frost, ion condensation from unregulated interior pressure equalization. Divinitus 9 hadn't hosted life support in 22,000 years, but something was maintaining structure integrity. The walls held. I walked first. Atun followed, his null field whispering against the edge of my senses like sand through fabric. Karu brought up the rear, mumbling commentary into his coil. "The exterior layering follows precursor Threnody symmetry," he mused. "Not uncommon in pre-collapse theological constructs, but the lack of time signature decay, that's significant." "Meaning?" I asked, stepping through the final seal. "Meaning," he said. "Something's been praying in here. Recently. The corridor beyond was like a memory rebuilt by someone who never lived it. Walls of interwoven alloy struts inscribed with curved liturgical bands, none repeating, none legible. The floor was uneven but only slightly, each step perfectly designed to force a half-conscious gait adjustment. Ritualized walking, a hallway that demanded reverence through discomfort. Atun paused at the threshold, field interference increasing. "Push through it," I muttered. We advanced. The first chamber opened like a throat, wide, echoing, circular. A choir chamber, though there were no seats, just ascending tiers of resonance plating, each one choked with shriveled vines and blackened ash. Karu stepped past me and examined the plating. "Flesh has been here." "What kind?" He turned. "Your kind." I walked to the center. A dais stood raised from the floor, smooth as melt glass and warm. I knelt. The tether warmed. "Don't open it," Atun said. "Field is thinning." "I know." I unlatched the casing. The interior was dark, but my shard eye immediately flared. Color halos surged outward in ribbons of gold and green. Instructions. The protocol wanted something enacted, and I was already the instrument. I breathed slowly. The whisper thread lined around the reliquary flared with motion, symbols blooming from heat and proximity. Words filled my throat like fluid, and I spoke. Divinitas 9. Codex bearer present. Activate communion relay. Patenteer. Recompose. The floor trembled. A low tone rang through the chamber, too low for sound. Bone deep. A signal passing through marrow, not ears. I gasped because something moved beneath the floor. Living code, language given shape, pulsing like organs behind transparent walls. The chamber lit. One by one, layered tiers illuminated from beneath, each plate revealing etched forms, like bodies caught in glass. Not quite human, but familiar. Ancestor template composite, Karu murmured. They're building gods from guesses. And I realized these weren't remains. They were blueprints. Every memory I'd ever ingested, every prayer, every myth, every chant of mourning or call to return, it had been feeding into a structure waiting to match pattern. I was the pattern. Protocol spike incoming, Atun warned. Subspace pressure rising. I couldn't stop shaking. It's using me. Yes, Karu said, stepping back. And you're letting it. The chamber ceiling began to unfold, like paper bending itself into new angles, new architectures. Shapes not meant for Euclidean understanding. A vaulted weave unfolded above us, strands of metal and light interlacing mid-air. Floating sigils twisted into three-dimensional grammar. Some ancient machine was responding to my presence. The construct was rewriting itself in real time. I heard my voice again. Tier complete. Fragments synchronized. Initiate projection cascade. Atun moved. He slammed the reliquary shut and yanked the tether from my port. My body seized and I crumpled forward, blood in my mouth, cold across my skin. Then a whisper. My voice again. You are the Codex bearer. I gasped for breath. Karu was staring at me, wide-eyed, curious. Do you understand what this means? He asked. I sat up, trembling. I don't even know who I am anymore. You're the instrument, Karu said, and it's tuning the universe through you. He turned to the floating webwork of symbols overhead. This is a divine mnemonic engine. The protocol isn't scripture. It's software for resurrection, and you're the seed data. We made our way back through the corridor. No resistance now. The construct had accepted me, or assimilated me. The umbilical seal closed behind us. The Sanction's ghost detached from the construct's flank, and Divinitus 9 simply returned to its stillness. Rayar met us in the chamber. He didn't speak at first, just watched me, like he was weighing something too heavy to speak aloud. Finally, it's begun, he said. Protocol resonance jumped 5 systems the moment the construct's glyph array engaged, he continued. Old prayer nodes are flaring to life. Cults are consolidating. One of them is already rewriting its genetic code to match ancestral myths. Karu tilted his head. The fragments are calling home. And me. I couldn't feel my own heartbeat anymore. Only echoes. I couldn't tell if the silence inside me was peace or absence. After Divinitus 9, everything had gone still. The voices I'd come to recognize, not distinct but consistent, had quieted. The ambient chorus of memories I'd carried since Hellion 4 no longer crowded the back of my mind. The construct had taken them, or sorted them. We broke orbit 4 hours ago. Karu hadn't stopped talking since. The Orion Theta node has fully transitioned to ancestral governance. 17 dialects rewoven, 4 of them thought extinct. Their ruling council now seats figures chosen by, get this, ancestral memory resonance. The candidates inhaled dust from dead relatives. You're a prophet there now. Probably a demigod. His voice carried from the bridge as I walked the central spine corridor of the Sanction's ghost, fingertips trailing the chilled edge of the bulkhead. You're enjoying this, I said quietly. Of course, he called back unfazed. It's the greatest theological infection in recorded history. It's not just rewriting belief, it's rewriting biology, language, symbolic interfaces. Entire worlds are recoding themselves based on resonance with the fragments. Faith as executable code. And you, he leaned into view from the corner alcove, his optic nodes gleaming under the corridor's dull phosphors. You're the carrier wave. I met his eyes. Do you believe it? Believe? His mandibles ticked. No. But belief isn't a prerequisite for pattern recognition. I turned into the archive annex. The lights followed me lazily, activating only as I stepped through. Old power-saving subroutines from when the ship was still a patrol vessel. Back then, it had carried inquisitorial lore, memory sanitation crews, and entire databanks of controlled scriptures. Now, the walls held little more than dust. Rayar Cotain stood before a spiraling rack of memory cores, bare-handed, staring at the same one he'd been staring at the day I first arrived aboard. He didn't look up when I entered. How bad is it? He turned. The bags under his eyes had deepened. His prosthetic hand clicked against the crystal edge of the core. 3 systems have entered ritual lockdown. A dozen more are rewriting planetary protocols to align with recovered myth cycles. The Accord's remnants are split. Some think the protocol is a weapon. Others think it's a final chance at relevance. And you? He paused. Then, I think I should have burned these memories when I had the chance. The words hit harder than I expected. I stepped forward into the dim light of the archive node. You kept them. I couldn't let them vanish, he murmured. Even the ones I harvested from heretics. They weren't wrong, Vel. Not always. They saw something coming. He trailed off. You doubted too late. He nodded, the movement slow. And now the protocol is activating itself, self-propagating. You've become the convergence point. When you synced with Divinitus 9, you completed a triad, 3 fragments. That's all it needed to begin manifesting. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot but steady. It's not just scripture anymore, it's vector logic. I exhaled through my nose, stepped to the table in the center of the room, and slotted my tether into the idle relay port. My retinal shard flickered, trying to read nearby engrams, but the density was too high in here, too many ghosts. Can we stop it? Rayar didn't answer. The comline flared, Atun's voice. Wraith, bridge now. I pulled free of the port and moved. Cotain followed without a word. The bridge was dimmed for long-range scans. Outside, the warp horizon was curving, visible distortions rippling across the forward viewport like veins in bruised glass. Atun stood motionless at the central console, his null field pulsing a slow stabilizer rhythm. Karoo hunched over the command table, tapping through rapid feed bursts from various planetary receivers. We're picking up a pattern we shouldn't be seeing, Karoo said without looking up. There's a prayer cycle, matching Divinitus 9's cadence being performed live. On Orivax Prime. I blinked. That system's quarantined. Nothing's been active there since the deconsecration riots. Until now, Karoo said. He tapped again. They're rebuilding the dead dialect, word for word, gesture for gesture, as if someone handed them the right schema. I stepped closer. Are you saying it's spreading without physical contact? I'm saying, Karoo replied, that belief is infectious, and now it's autonomous. Atun tilted his head. No, not autonomous, he said. Directed. We all turned. The protocol was fragmented for containment, he continued. Its design required interpretive minds to fulfill its activation, but the more fragments synchronize, the less interpretation is required. It is shifting from belief-dependent to belief-generating. Meaning? I asked. It no longer needs worshippers, Atun said. It cultivates them. We fell into silence. I sat heavily in the command chair, palms pressed to my thighs. The reliquary I'd used on Hellion 4 still rested on the adjacent console. It was dormant now, but the whisper thread lining still shimmered in my shard's periphery. Karoo finally broke the silence. We need to terminate the seed. I looked up. You mean me? He nodded. It's the only viable vector collapse. The protocol is nesting in your pattern memory. Sever that, and the resonance chain might fail. And if it doesn't? He gave a slow shrug. Then we failed intelligently. Rayar stepped forward. Wait. Karoo scowled. He's the ignition core. Do you deny that? No, Rayar said. But he's also the only one who's seen the framework. He heard the fail phrase. I blinked. Fail phrase? Rayar nodded. A myth embedded in the second shard. The choir station memory. Buried in the chant cadence. A conditional termination signal. It would collapse the foundational structure. But it must be spoken by the codex bearer at a specific psychic node. I stared. Where? He turned slowly. Echoier crucible. Atun stiffened. That place was decommissioned, he said. Rayar gave him a hard look. You were grown there. Atun's voice dropped. I do not return. You might not have a choice, I said. He met my eyes. No emotion, but his silence cracked just slightly. If we go there, Karoo said, we'll need full containment, null fields at maximum, and we'll need to isolate Vel the moment we arrive. Rayar turned. I'll prepare the core archives. Karoo, muttering, stalked off. I was left with Atun. He stood still. You're afraid, I said. I do not fear, he replied. You remember more than you admit. He looked at me, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. I remember. Enough. That was more than I'd expected. The ship began course alignment. The stars outside twisted subtly. I closed my eyes. Somewhere inside me the protocol whispered, but not in words, in choices. And I knew the next one was mine. The descent into the crucible wasn't just physical. I felt it before we even breached atmosphere, like the weight of a closed book pressing into the back of my skull. Something unread. Something waiting. The Sanction's ghost broke through the low-orbit layers of the Echoier crucible without resistance. The atmosphere here had never been properly engineered. Thin and oily, it shimmered in vertical striations against the forward viewport, light refracted through its chemical haze like stained glass turned sour. The planet was an unfinished experiment, a world abandoned halfway through its own design. The Echoier consortium had chosen it for one reason only. It was dead, a vacuum of meaning, a blank page, perfect for shaping men like Atun. Now, we were going back. I watched him from the upper deck as the ship set down on the ridge above the Null Monastery. His posture didn't shift. He hadn't spoken in over 2 hours. Rayar stood beside him, cloak clasped tight around his neck, expression taut and unreadable. Karoo was hunched over the data feeds, running trace simulations of my engram fluctuations, mapping them like seismic readings. The crucible emerged beneath us, half-buried structures, polygonal spires jutting from the ash plains, their outer membranes cracked like old teeth. The entry hall was still intact. The relay nodes at its perimeter were active again. I stepped out first. The wind was thin and dry, moving like regret across the surface. Nothing lived here. Even sound felt cautious, reluctant to travel far. We passed through the gate. The walls were coated in silence dampeners, slabs of memory null alloy engraved with anti-cadence marks. I remembered reading about these in a report years ago. They were designed to erase resonance, to kill echo, to remove the possibility of worship. Karoo trailed a hand along the wall, muttering. They built this like a womb, he said. Not for birth, for forgetting. Quiet, Rayar snapped. We descended the inner corridor. It curved downward. No elevators, no rails. You had to walk it. A descent by design. Atun walked at the front. I could see his movements changing, not faltering exactly, but tightening. A rigid sort of stillness beneath the stillness. He didn't want to be here, not because of fear, because the place knew him. He'd been made here. We reached the terminal chamber. The room was vast, far more than the crucible's external architecture should have allowed. It spread in all directions like the memory of a cathedral too large to fit in one mind. At its center, the node, a spire of glass thread crystal shaped not by tool or hand, but by code. It thrummed without sound, and it waited. The last psychic gate, the final locus of the Godwake protocol. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't monstrous, it was ready. I approached and my tether began to activate without my input. The shard in my eye brightened, flooding my vision with syntax halos, prayer vectors. My spine ached. The reliquaries in my pack began to heat, each one containing a fragment of someone else's god. Rayar placed a stabilizer rod on the floor behind me. He looked up, met my eyes. "If you say the phrase," he said, "everything stops, the framework collapses, the protocol ends, you'll burn the bridge before it completes. And if I don't, then the universe gets rewritten by faith." I breathed once and walked into the center. The moment I passed the node's threshold, the world changed. I fell without falling, spinning into a vision of light and voice and stone that wasn't memory, wasn't dream. It was construction, a city of glass and chorus, written from the inside out. I stood at its center, and I was all of them. Every voice I'd ever taken, every prayer I'd ever swallowed, they were inside me, not screaming or pleading, singing. The protocol wasn't just a resurrection system, it was an index, a way to bring back the dead, not by copying them, not by cloning, but by remembering them accurately enough that reality would agree. Belief as compression, pattern as consent. I stood in the vision, trembling, and I knew the phrase. It was a severance command, a kill switch written in syllables too old for grammar. If I spoke it, the resonance would fail. The gate would shut and I would survive. Alone. I could return to the ship, tell them it was over, that I had chosen reality over faith. But in the stillness, behind the structure of the song, I heard a child's voice. A prayer for their father. Buried in ash, forgotten. I heard an alien chorus, a funeral rite performed without bodies, mourning the loss of their last son. I heard Rayar's voice decades ago whispering an incineration command into a victim's ear, only to hesitate before pressing the button. I heard a tune dreaming of silence. I stepped forward. "I remember the lost," I whispered, my voice trembling, cracking. I walked through their end. The structure responded. Light flared, symbols aligned. Not to become them. My body was vanishing at the edges, slow dissolution, but to carry the thread. And I let go, not just of the kill phrase, but of the need to know if I was real. I opened to the protocol, and it sang through me. I do not remember the moment it completed. I remember only the feeling, like being rewritten, not erased. Like the body wasn't a container, but a prism. The first city returned on the 6th day. It rose from the sands of a dead moon where the wind never blew, made of glass and breath. The dead didn't come back as bodies, they came back as structures, as rituals, as culture. The protocol had never been about resurrection. It had been about remembrance. And I had become its voice. I do not know if I survived. I speak these words to you as a recollection, as memory. And memory is a kind of life. If you find this recording, remember, the gods we thought we lost were never meant to return. We were meant to become them, together.